The heels I wore clicked a little too loud against the marble floor, a sharp reminder of how out of place I already felt. The elevator had opened to a glittering hall at the top of the building, a high-rise venue downtown, the kind of place where deals are made over whiskey and knowing laughs. Niles, my husband, looked right at home. His tailored suit caught the light just right. Mine, borrowed from a friend and a size too snug, didn't. We stepped into the party like we'd rehearsed it, but it didn't take long for the choreography to fall apart. Everyone seemed to know him. Executives, clients, junior analysts, shaking his hand, clapping his back, calling him the man of the hour. I was introduced a few times as my wife, Kristin, with the kind of offhand tone you'd use for a coat check receipt. No one asked what I did. No one remembered the long nights I stayed up editing his pitch decks, or how I coached him through his fear of public speaking before he landed this promotion. Niles soaked in their praise with a smile that didn't flicker once in my direction. I stood by a table near the bar, trying to make myself smaller, my hand around a glass of warm Chardonnay I didn't want. The chandeliers above sparkled, the jazz band played something smooth and forgettable. And somewhere in the middle of it, I realized, I wasn't even part of this story. I was a prop in the backdrop of his success. Then came the toast. He clinked his glass with a knife, commanding instant attention. "Thank you all," he began, voice strong, charming, rehearsed. I saw the pride in his eyes, the same pride I used to draw out of him when he was doubting himself. Then he turned to me. "And let's not forget my little house general," he said with a chuckle. "She may not understand business, but she knows how to keep the house running like a well-oiled machine." Laughter rippled through the room. I smiled. I had to. But inside, something snapped. He shared a story next, something personal, once sacred. The night I stayed up fixing his entire sales presentation because his assistant botched the data. Only this time, he told it like I'd nagged him into fixing it, like I didn't know when to let a man do his job. Laughter again. The room roared. My face burned. Across the room, a woman, someone from HR, maybe, locked eyes with me. She didn't say anything, but the way her smile faded. I knew she saw it. All of it. I excused myself quietly. No one stopped me. In the restroom, I faced the mirror under harsh yellow lights. For a second, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Lipstick slightly smudged, eyes too tired for the sparkle in the room outside. How did I let myself disappear? I whispered to my reflection. Images rushed in, me highlighting contracts on the couch, sending emails under his name to save time, giving up my own career for now. I pulled out my phone, typed a furious message to my sister, fingers shaking. I hovered over send. Then erased it. I fixed my lipstick. Recentered my necklace. Took a deep breath. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. At the sink, a napkin sat crumpled next to the soap. I folded it carefully into a swan. It was something I used to do for my kids at restaurants, when they were little and restless. A silly distraction, but now, it felt like an anchor. A tiny assertion of control. When I stepped back into the room, nothing had changed. Except me. I didn't walk to Niles, I circled the room slowly, taking in every face, every gesture. He stood by the bar again, laughing too loud, talking to someone about the wife who doesn't get corporate culture. I didn't flinch. He hadn't noticed my absence. Of course he hadn't. I saw it then, this wasn't his natural environment. It was one I'd built for him. I was the scaffolding he climbed to get here. And he didn't even know. He tossed another joke at my expense. Something about how I still print grocery lists. They laughed. He laughed. I stood still. Inside, I felt nothing. Not yet rage, not yet pain. Just clarity. He wasn't protecting me. He never had. I'd been shielding him all along. He didn't deserve it. I made my way to the valet stand before the party ended. The night air was cooler than I expected. I wrapped my coat tighter, more from instinct than chill. Behind me, Niles called out to gather people for a group photo. I heard him say, "Kristin, maybe step aside so the team can fit better." I did. But I kept walking. My heels clicked again, this time, steady. Not apologetic. Not small. At the curb, I stood alone, watching cars pull in and out. I didn't check my phone. I didn't try. He had his spotlight. But the next act? That one's mine. We didn't say a word when we got into the car. The valet handed Niles the keys with a grin, still riding the high from the party. He muttered a half-hearted thanks and slid into the driver's seat like the world owed him applause. I sat beside him, my hands folded neatly on my lap, the city lights flickering past the window like silent judges. He pulled out his phone and scrolled. Probably checking LinkedIn or texting a client. Not once did he glance over to ask how I was doing, or if I'd had a good time. I could have been a coat tossed in the passenger seat for all the attention he paid me. I cleared my throat. Your boss's wife said the party was stunning. She liked the band. He muttered, not looking up. I tried again. That promotion came fast. When did it all come together? He shrugged. Been in talks. Not a big deal. His voice was flat, defensive. Like I was intruding. Like my curiosity about his life was an inconvenience. I watched his reflection in the window, a man more comfortable in a boardroom than in his own marriage. The silence pressed harder the longer we drove. I knew that silence. It wasn't peace. It was a wall. When we pulled into the driveway, he didn't wait for me. Just grabbed his bag and walked in. I followed, slower, my heels soft on the tile floor this time. After he went to bed, I stayed in the kitchen under the dim light of the stove hood, holding a mug I didn't drink from. Something he'd said earlier, working from the cafe didn't sit right. He hadn't mentioned a cafe before. And lately, he left with a gym bag instead of his laptop. I opened the laptop, logged into our shared account. He never paid close attention to the alerts, always assuming I handled the bills. I scanned the transactions. And there it was. A company name I didn't recognize, charging us monthly. Workspace Solutions. I clicked deeper. It wasn't a coffee shop, it was a private office rental. 3 months ago, the first charge appeared. All while he was supposedly working from home. I dug further. Clicked through his tagged photos on LinkedIn. One post, 2 weeks old, his coworker smiling beside him with the caption, "Congrats on your new studio, man. Next level." He never mentioned it. Not once. I printed the lease contract I found through our eDocs. A 12-month rental. Twice our mortgage. I underlined the amount. Then underlined it again. What else hadn't he told me? The next morning, I made coffee like always. The aroma filled the kitchen, warm and familiar, mocking me. He came down in gym clothes, sipped his drink, and said casually, "I'm working from the cafe today." I nodded, didn't blink. Didn't challenge. He doesn't just lie, I thought. He rehearses it. He grabbed his keys and a duffel bag, full of fresh clothes I hadn't washed. I watched his hand on the doorknob. Memorized how his shoulders hunched slightly when he walked out. He was always tense before he lied. I stood by the sink for a long while after he left. Not shaking. Not crying. Just observing. I drove to the library. Found a quiet table by the window. Opened my laptop and created a new spreadsheet. I titled it, "In, Full Picture." I started listing things. Every transaction, every shift in behavior, every lie I could remember. I color-coded the months, added notes, pulled screenshots. I remembered when he used to call me from work just to check if I'd eaten lunch. Now he came home hours late, distracted, smelling like a stranger. I pulled up the address of the rented office. It wasn't near his company. It wasn't near anything related to his job. But it was right next to a women's co-working space I'd heard of, a sleek, minimalist building with glass walls and rooftop yoga classes. He didn't just find a new office, I muttered to myself. He found a place to disappear. I closed the laptop and sat still for a moment. I wouldn't confront him yet. Not alone. That night, he came in later than usual. Said something about traffic. His shirt smelled faintly of cologne I didn't recognize, something woodsy, expensive, not what he normally wore. He smiled like everything was normal, kissed my cheek like I was a checkpoint. I greeted him with my usual smile. Set his plate at the table, the way I always had. Then turned to the sink, hands in the soapy water. He thinks this is still his house, I thought. He'll learn soon enough, it never really was. The next morning, I told Niles I had plans to meet a friend for brunch. He didn't ask who. He never did anymore. He just nodded, tightening his tie in front of the mirror, humming a tune like a man who thought the world still belonged to him. I waited until his car pulled out of the driveway before I grabbed my bag and keys. I wasn't meeting anyone. I was going to see the place that had been sitting like a splinter in my mind, the mysterious office address I'd found in our joint account records. Gellert Consulting LLC. I'd stared at those words for hours the night before. My last name. His business. My absence. He built a company in our marriage, I said under my breath as I backed out of the driveway, but not with me. Halfway downtown, I called Frank, a friend from my law firm days. We hadn't spoken in months, but he still picked up on the second ring. Kristin? You okay? Can you check something for me? I asked. I gave him the company name, my voice steady but cold. There was a pause, the clicking of keys, and then his tone shifted. It's registered to Niles Gellert and a second partner. Dara Vaughn. The name landed like a thud. Who's she? No idea, Frank said. But the documents list both as co-founders. Filed 3 months ago. I thanked him, hung up, and drove the rest of the way without music. The address led me to a refurbished warehouse in the design district, red brick, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a big white sign that said the Foundry Co-work. It was the kind of place that smelled like ambition and overpriced coffee. I parked down the block and walked in like I belonged. Hi, I said to the receptionist with a smile I'd practiced for years, the kind that made people underestimate me. I'm here for Gellert Consulting. Her face lit up. Oh, Niles and Dara. They're great. But they're at a client brunch right now. She motioned toward a hallway. Their office is just down that way, but they keep an open door policy. Of course they do, I said, keeping my tone light. The office looked nothing like the one at home. It was minimalist, polished wood, black steel, glass. Everything screamed curated partnership. On the far wall was a corkboard with photos from events, networking mixers, charity galas, pitch nights. There was Niles, his arm casually around a woman with chestnut hair and a confident smile. Dara Vaughn. They looked like a team. Like a brand. Beneath one framed photo was a printed quote, "Build your empire with those who believe in you." I almost laughed. Apparently, that wasn't me. I walked out, heart pounding but face calm. Once inside the car, I let the silence stretch. My hands trembled against the steering wheel, but I didn't cry. I scrolled through my phone, searching her name. Her LinkedIn came up instantly, public, polished, eager. Co-founder, Gellert Consulting LLC. Recently divorced. Half her posts tagged Niles. So proud to build something meaningful. Couldn't ask for a better partner. I scrolled until I found one from 2 months ago. A photo of them together, holding champagne flutes. The caption, "Celebrating milestones that matter." That was the night of our anniversary. The dinner he cancelled because of a client meeting. I took screenshots of every post, every tag, every timestamp. Proof. Small, sharp truths that I could hold in my hands. If you want to be underestimated, I whispered, act invisible. If you want to win, stay silent until they forget you're watching. I wasn't thinking about confrontation anymore. I was thinking about exposure. By noon, I was sitting in Marcia's kitchen. She'd been my mentor when I first started out in HR law, and over the years, she'd become something closer to a compass. A no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes that could spot deception from across a room. When I finished telling her everything, she didn't gasp or pity me. She just nodded slowly. You finally see him clearly. I think I do. Then listen carefully, she said, leaning forward. Never confront a narcissist when he's in control of the story. They rewrite it before you're done talking. Build your version of the truth. With receipts. I nodded. Documentation, not confrontation. Exactly. And Kristin, she paused, her voice softening. You've spent years building him. Maybe it's time to build yourself again. We spent an hour reviewing what I'd found. Marcia promised to help me look over company filings, maybe even dig into payroll if she could. When I stood to leave, she smiled faintly. You remember contracts better than anyone I ever trained. Use that. He taught me how to read between the lines, I said quietly. He forgot I remember every word. That night, the house was still. Niles was in the shower, humming like a man with nothing to hide. I sat at the kitchen counter with my laptop open, scrolling through our shared drive. There it was, A new folder I hadn't seen before. Q2 strategy, internal only. I clicked. Inside was a proposal labeled restructuring, new leadership alignment. I scrolled to the first bullet point. Phase 1, replace internal counsel, Kristin G. My own name. In black and white. I stared at it until the words blurred, then leaned back in the chair, breathing evenly. The sound of running water upstairs carried through the house. He planned to erase me from his business, I whispered, closing the laptop. Just like he did at the party. The email came on a quiet Thursday afternoon. I'd been cleaning out old files when Marcia's name appeared at the top of my inbox. The subject line read, "Thought you might want to see this." I opened it without thinking. What stared back at me was a glossy digital flyer for an upcoming Dallas Business Summit. Niles's face, centered and polished, smiled from the screen. Right beside him, Dara Vaughn. The title beneath them read, Power Partnerships, Building Brands with Trust. But it wasn't the headline that made my stomach twist. It was the line at the bottom, Spouses/Partners Welcome. For a long moment, I just stared. Then, almost by reflex, I dialed the venue. I told the woman who answered that I was confirming registration details for Mr. Gellert. She clicked through her system and said cheerfully, "Yes, ma'am, 2 tickets reserved for Niles and Dara. They've attended our events before. Lovely couple." Lovely. When I hung up, the house felt too still. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, ordinary sounds that suddenly felt wrong, as if they didn't belong in the same world where my husband paraded someone else as his partner. "He erased me from the story," I murmured. "And replaced me in full view." By the time the summit arrived, I already knew I'd go. I needed to see it myself, to look the lie in the face. I chose my clothes with care, understated, professional, invisible. A soft gray dress, a low bun, sunglasses. The kind of woman no one notices but everyone underestimates. The ballroom was all polished wood floors and curated chatter. The crowd was full of eager faces, the kind of people who believe success could be bottled and sold if they smiled wide enough. I found a seat in the back row, where the light dimmed just enough to make me anonymous. Then they appeared. Niles and Dara, side by side, dressed like a matched set. He wore the navy suit I'd picked out for him years ago, she wore cream, her hand brushing his arm as they walked. The moderator beamed. "We're honored to welcome real-life partners in business and in life, Niles Gellert and Dara Vaughn." The applause was thunderous. Niles leaned into the microphone. "Partnership is about balance," he said. "One person dreams, the other keeps the vision alive." Dara smiled, her tone warm but deliberate. "And when you find the right person, you stop questioning the path. You just build." A wave of clapping followed. I didn't join in. I watched. Observed the rhythm of their performance, the way they finished each other's sentences like trained actors. Not a single direct lie. Just a mission, packaged beautifully. When the session broke for coffee, I slipped toward the lobby. But before I could leave, a woman tapped my arm. "You must be Dara's assistant," she said brightly. "She talks about you all the time." I blinked once, smiled. "Oh? What does she say?" "That you keep her organized, she's lucky to have you." The woman offered her hand. "Charlotte. I run a small marketing firm." She studied me for a moment, then tilted her head. "You know, you look familiar. I think we met years ago, at a charity dinner. You were with Niles, right? He said you two separated not long after that." "Guess it all worked out." "Guess it did," I said softly, my voice calm. She smiled and walked away, leaving her words hanging in the air like a faint perfume. He hadn't just rewritten the story, he'd been rehearsing it for years. Carefully, consistently, until people stopped questioning which version was true. By the time I reached the car, the sun had dipped low over downtown, the glass buildings glowing with evening light. I sat there for a while, hands on the steering wheel, the world outside moving as if nothing had changed. But everything had. At home, I spread the day's collection across the dining table, printed bios, event photos, quotes from the summit program. I placed them beside my marriage certificate, our joint mortgage, and the business papers I'd once helped him proofread line by line. I opened my laptop and pulled up my private in folder. Inside, I began a new section, Public Representation Timeline. I listed every appearance where Niles and Dara had stood together, every reference to their partnership, every date that contradicted his stories to me. Piece by piece, a pattern formed, a timeline of deceit dressed as ambition. If they want the spotlight, I said under my breath, they'll have to answer for the shadows too. Then I began drafting something new, an anonymous email to their clients and investors. No emotion, no accusation, just facts, unauthorized representation, ethical misrepresentation, potential conflict of interest. Nothing dramatic. Just truth. But when it came time to send, I paused. Timing was everything. The truth, once released, couldn't be controlled. And I wanted control. Later that night, after dinner dishes were washed and the house had gone quiet, I walked into his home office. His desk lamp still glowed faintly, papers neatly stacked, his world undisturbed. I placed a sealed envelope in the center of the desk. Heavy paper. Gold wax seal. Inside, one short note written in my cleanest hand: "You invited her to the future. I'm reclaiming the past. See you in court." I turned off the light and closed the door behind me. He'd find it in the morning. He'd pick it up with the same careless confidence he always had, and then he'd start wondering. That was what I wanted. For him to wonder how much I knew. And how far I was willing to go. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but my mind was already set. I decided to face Niles at the office, calmly and directly. I dressed with purpose, charcoal skirt, crisp blouse, the kind of outfit that once used to make him say I looked like I could take over the world. Maybe I finally would. But when I reached the front door and turned the key, it didn't move. I frowned and tried again. Nothing. The metal resisted, firm and final. I bent down, testing the lock, then checked the handle. Deadbolt changed. Overnight. Through the glass, taped to the inside, was a white envelope. My name was written in his handwriting, sharp, deliberate. "For you, Kristin." I tore it open and unfolded the single sheet inside. It was a legal draft. Clean font, standard letterhead. A notice suggesting my voluntary relocation. As if I were a tenant being politely evicted. I read every word without blinking. Then I smiled. A small, quiet curve that didn't reach my eyes. "You finally showed your hand," I whispered. No panic this time. No shock. Just the kind of clarity that comes after too many lies. I pulled my phone from my bag and called Marcia. "Meet me at the courthouse cafe in 30 minutes, I said. "Bring a pen and your patience." Her voice on the other end carried both worry and curiosity. "What happened?" "He just locked the wrong woman out," I replied, and hung up. By the time I reached downtown, the city had come alive, cars crawling through intersections, people rushing to meetings. Marcia was already waiting, 2 coffees on the table. I sat down, slid the letter toward her. She skimmed it quickly, then again more slowly, her lips tightening. "He changed the locks?" she asked. "Sometime last night," I said. "No warning, no paperwork filed, just this polite little insult." She pushed her glasses up. "That's a civil and marital violation. You're still on the deed." I leaned back in my chair, stirring my coffee. "He's trying to scare me. But he just broke the one law he can't smile his way out of." Marcia nodded slowly. "We'll use it. You still remember contract law?" I smirked. "Every word of it." She slid her notebook across the table. "Then start writing. File a claim for obstruction of joint assets. We'll call this what it is, an unlawful exclusion." I opened my laptop. My fingers didn't shake. The anger was gone. What replaced it was something sharper, steadier. "This isn't about him anymore," I said. "It's about me taking back the space he thought he owned." Marcia smiled faintly. "That's the Kristin I remember." When I finished typing, I closed the lid, feeling that rare kind of silence that isn't emptiness, it's control. I left the cafe, walked straight to my car, and drove to his office without calling ahead. The building's glass doors glared under the sun, reflecting the kind of success he'd always craved. I walked in anyway. The receptionist hesitated when she saw me but didn't stop me. My name was still on the founding paperwork, she knew better. I opened his office door without knocking. Niles looked up mid-conversation, eyes widening for a split second before his face reset into that familiar smirk. Dara stood beside him, one hand resting on his desk like she belonged there. "Kristin," he said carefully, "this isn't a good time." "It rarely is," I replied, setting my folder on the desk. But this won't take long. I spread the papers out one by one, the marriage certificate, the company registration, the asset reports, all signed by both of us. You used joint funds to start this company, I said, voice even. That makes me a legal co-owner. Which means every decision you've made without my consent is a violation. He leaned back, crossing his arms. You're embarrassing yourself. I met his gaze. I learned from the best. The room fell still. The receptionist lingered in the doorway, pretending to look busy. Dara's smile had vanished. Her fingers tightened around the edge of a file. I gathered the papers, tucked them neatly back into the folder, and stood. Change the locks again if you want, I said softly. Just remember who owns the key. Then I turned and walked out. My heels echoed down the hallway, steady and sharp, each step another line in a story I was finally writing for myself. Outside, the air felt clean. Lighter. My reflection in the building's glass doors didn't look like a woman pushed out of her home, it looked like someone who had just stepped back into her power. He thought cutting me off would make me small. But he just handed me proof that I was half of everything he built. I met Marcia again that afternoon to sign the preliminary court filing. The papers were thick, but my hand didn't shake as I signed. This, I said quietly, isn't retaliation. It's restoration. Marcia smiled. And how do you feel? Steady, I said. And for once, not angry. I paused, looking at the final page. Sometimes strength isn't about fighting back. It's about letting them think they've won. That night, I slept like a person who finally understood her own leverage. When the next morning came, sunlight spilled through the blinds. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and saw an email with no name, just a subject line, he's planning something. Meet me before it's too late. Attached was a single photo, Niles and Dara, standing outside a law firm I knew well. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I closed the laptop slowly. If he wants war, I said aloud, he'll find I've already built the battlefield. The parking lot was already full when I arrived at the quarterly town hall. The company logo gleamed across the glass entrance, the one I helped design back when this business was ours, not just his. Inside, the energy was bright, confident, rehearsed. People laughed too loudly, shook hands too tightly, like they were trying to prove they belonged there. And then I saw him, Niles, on stage, commanding the room like a man who'd never been questioned. His voice carried through the speakers, smooth and calculated, every word designed to charm. I stood near the back, unnoticed. I'd been invisible here before, this time it was by choice. As he wrapped up, the MC called someone else to join him. And there she was, Kayla. Younger, sharper, and clearly enjoying the spotlight. She smiled like she'd been rehearsing for weeks, standing close enough to make the illusion believable. I stayed seated. My jaw tight, my pulse steady. This stage was once ours. Now she's his front row. Their dialogue rolled on, buzzwords, jokes, fake chemistry. The crowd lapped it up. But all I could hear was the echo of my own voice years ago, standing next to him, doing the same thing. It wasn't jealousy, it was recognition. He was recycling my lines, our strategy, everything we built. I could have walked out. But no. Not yet. He'd humiliated me in private and erased me in public. That balance was about to shift. When the presentation ended, applause filled the hall. I waited for the noise to die down. As people started mingling, I moved toward the stage. Calm. Focused. I reached the podium and tapped the microphone. Excuse me, I said, voice clear but steady. I'd like to say something. The sound system cut the air in half. Conversation stopped. Niles turned, confusion flickering before his smile returned, thin, performative. Kayla's hand froze mid-wave. I looked at both of them, then at the audience. I just wanted to clarify something, I said. My tone wasn't angry, it was final. You're not a partner, I said, eyes locked on Kayla. You're temporary. The silence that followed was heavy. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone dropped their drink. Kayla's face strained of color, and Niles's smile cracked just enough to show the panic behind it. I let the moment breathe before finishing. Legacy isn't built on photo ops, I said. It's built on truth. And then I turned and walked off the stage. No one stopped me. They just watched. Outside, the heat of the afternoon wrapped around me. I didn't cry. I didn't even shake. I walked to my car, opened the door, and just sat there for a minute, the hum of the engine mixing with my breath. I unlocked my phone and opened the in folder. Dozens of files, dates, receipts, evidence of his arrogance disguised as partnership. I opened the spreadsheet I'd built weeks ago. The numbers didn't lie: company funds redirected, personal trips billed as work. I had every detail lined up. Before driving off, I stepped out, walked to the event banner, and took a picture. It read, "Partners in Innovation," with their faces side by side. I whispered to myself, "Not for me." Then I got back in the car. I called Marcia. "It's time for the next move," I said. Her voice came calm and measured. "He's officially on notice." I hung up, my reflection staring back from the windshield. Humiliation was the starting bell, I said quietly. This is the warning shot. By evening, I was home. The house felt both empty and liberating. I poured a glass of water, opened my laptop, and sent a single email to key clients and partners. Subject line: due diligence attached. Inside, I included a concise packet: public documents, factual data, no accusations. The kind of truth that speaks for itself. When it sent, I didn't smile. I just closed the laptop, grabbed my mat, and drove to my yoga class. The instructor dimmed the lights and spoke about releasing what no longer serves you. I nearly laughed. I wasn't releasing, I was reclaiming. My mantra that hour was mine alone: I am not a chapter in his story, I am the author of mine. Later, I ate dinner by myself, simple salad, quiet kitchen. I pulled out an old book on corporate law precedents, not for nostalgia but for strength. Every rule, every case reminded me, power lies with whoever documents first and better. When I finally climbed into bed, the city lights bled softly through the curtains. I set my alarm for 6 a.m. The morning would bring noise, emails, calls, maybe panic from his side. I wanted to be ready. At midnight, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Nice speech. No name. Just that. I stared at the screen for a second, then smiled faintly. "Now you know I'm awake," I whispered to myself. They thought they owned the narrative. They thought I'd play defense. But they forgot something important. I was never the supporting character. I've been the writer all along. I walked into the kitchen that morning and something simply felt wrong. I poured my coffee, the steam rising in the soft early light, and stood there, listening, not for noise but for the absence of it. The house should have been alive with the usual soft hum of appliances and the familiar creaks of an old floor settling. Instead, it felt sterile. I glanced at the alarm panel by the door and saw 3 entries logged overnight, one at 2:15 a.m., when I was fast asleep in our bed. My heart skipped a beat, not out of panic, but out of recognition. In the garage, his briefcase was gone, the one thing he never left behind. The files in his home office drawer were untouched, but the joint asset ledger I kept safely was missing. I stood in silence and thought, silence is a language too, and this morning, it's screaming. I didn't call him. I didn't shout or demand an explanation. I walked out the door. The game was on. Mid-morning I sat at my laptop, tapping a name I hadn't used in years: Lynn Porter. She answered, polite and cautious. I asked for a quiet check of our joint holdings. "If he's putting money into a trust," she warned, "you won't find proof of intent." I answered, "I don't need his intent, I just need his arrogance." I waded through emails, phone checks, the moments stretching longer than I liked. At lunchtime I got a text from her: "You were right. A trust was filed 2 weeks ago." Attached was a PDF. I opened it and read the words at the bottom: "Beneficiaries, Kayla Martinez." My pulse didn't race, it settled like cold water into a still pool of knowing. He had moved assets behind my back. Not just moved them, but named someone else my husband's beneficiary. I closed the laptop, stood up slowly, and walked into the house like one who returns to claim what was always hers. He'd given me the proof. The rest was up to me. Later that afternoon I found the key. Taped under his desk drawer, the little brass piece I remembered seeing but locking away in memory. The bank manager nodded at my paperwork. I opened the safe deposit box and found the documents inside: our prenup, letters from business associates, and one new folder titled Postmarital Contingency. Inside, another trust form, his signature and Kayla's. Assets reserved for after separation. I stood there in that chilly vault room, my hand steady as a photograph being taken. I photographed everything. I sealed the folder, locked the box, and said, "Not today, Niles." My heels clicked on the tile as I left, each step like the end of a sentence. Back home I emailed the files to Marcia and called her. "How strong is this in court?" I asked. She didn't hesitate. "Bulletproof. He can't argue consent if you didn't know." I drafted a demand, either full dissolution of that trust or a 70-30 split in my favor. I read my own words aloud. "You took something from me. Now I'll take everything you thought was protected." I didn't feel anger, just direct, cold clarity. I sealed the prints in an envelope labeled confidential, to be opened in person only. Then I said to the mirror, "Control isn't about volume, it's about direction." That evening I drove downtown and visited his office. I placed the envelope on his assistant's desk, "For Mr. Carter. From Mrs. Carter." I walked out without looking back. On the drive home I didn't play music. The quiet was now mine, the kind of quiet that settles after a rowboat hits open water. Later that night my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. "Kristin," came the voice. "It's Kayla. We need to talk." "Alone?" I answered with quiet certainty. "When?" She said, "Tomorrow. Before he talks to you first." I hung up and sat in the dark of my living room. The stillness around me had a new taste, charged, expectant. The cracks weren't just showing anymore, they were splitting wide open. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped onto the rooftop lounge with 20 minutes to spare. The view was exactly what Kayla would pick, refined, clean, performative. Every inch of it whispered status. I chose a table in the corner, back against the wall, a habit I never dropped after the first time I got blindsided in court. From my bag, I pulled out the trust documents and the prepped folder, laying it neatly in front of me like I'd done 100 times in boardrooms before people forgot I built them. Kayla arrived just past the hour. Her heels clicked too hard across the tile, her dress was too formal for the setting, and her eyes darted toward mine like a child caught stealing. She sat without greeting. "I didn't come here to fight," she said, smoothing her skirt. "Good," I said. "Because I didn't come here to lose." The silence sat thick between us. A server came by and took our water orders. We didn't even glance at the menu. She wasn't here to eat, and neither was I. Kayla looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that makeup couldn't hide. Her hands trembled just slightly when she lifted her glass. I watched, waited, and let her find the courage to speak. "I never meant to hurt you," she finally said. "It started as a business arrangement." I didn't blink. "Niles. He came to me after your fundraiser. Said he needed to protect his name, the company, from what you were planning." "What I was planning," I echoed, keeping my tone even. She nodded, eyes down. "He told me you were gearing up to challenge the prenup. Said it would get ugly, public. He had this idea: fabricate an affair. Use edited footage from an old event. Add a hotel check-in under your name. Make it look real." I stared at her, unmoved. "If you contested the divorce, the tape would go viral," she added, voice cracking. "He said that was the only way to protect himself." "And you?" I asked. Kayla paused. "He promised me a 10% stake in the company. Said once you were out of the picture, we'd rebuild it, together." I slid a folder across the table. "That's funny. Because he's already transferred those shares. Not to you." She opened it with shaky hands. Inside were documents, signatures, timelines. Her name wasn't on any of them. "You're not the first woman he's promised the world to," I said. "Just the first dumb enough to think the promise came with a warranty." Her breath hitched. Her face fell. "You brought this to destroy me," she whispered. I pulled a single sheet from the folder. "No. I brought this to end it." It was her resignation letter, dated, formatted, ready for ink. "You'll sign that today," I said. "And you'll write a statement. 1 page. Saying you were manipulated into creating the affair story. Your words. Your signature." Her mouth parted. "You can't. In exchange, I won't pursue criminal charges," I said. "Conspiracy. Defamation. A judge would eat that up." Kayla stared at the page like it might bite her. "And if I say no?" I leaned in. "Then I go nuclear. With everything. Audio files. Emails. Surveillance footage. I'll drag this entire mess into the light. She shook her head slowly. You don't have to ruin me. I'm not the one who did, I said. He used you. Just like he used me. But I'm not the fool in his story anymore. Silence again. Then she took the pen from my hand and signed. When she finished, she looked up, eyes red. Please don't ruin me. That part's up to you, I said, collecting the pages. By the time I walked out, the city was bathed in twilight. I sat in my car and sent Marcia the scanned documents. Then I locked the originals in the fireproof box in my trunk. I didn't look back. The drive home was quiet. The kind of quiet that hums in your bones. I thought of a line my mother had taped to our fridge growing up. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Tonight wasn't a win. But it was something better, a boundary. A line I drew with permanent ink. I didn't win tonight, I said to the dark road. I just stopped letting him win. When I walked through the front door, the house was still. My daughter had fallen asleep at the dining table, surrounded by notes and textbooks. I kissed her forehead, moved her backpack to the floor, and whispered, this war was never just about me. It's about taking back what they made us live without. The next morning, while I was sipping coffee, the doorbell rang. A courier stood there, professional, silent. He handed me a manila envelope. Mrs. Carter? I nodded. He turned and walked off. Inside the envelope was a court summons. My name. His name. Niles was countersuing. I sat down, the paper in my lap. And just like that, I muttered, the gloves came off. The verdict came on a Wednesday morning, bright sun, courtroom humming with routine. The judge's words were firm. My majority claims held. His countersuit dismissed for retaliation, lacking substance. In his statement he called me uncooperative. In hers, I called him betrayer. The court chose half a world and ignored the other. I listened as the judge noted my under calculated assault. I sat still. The fine imposed on him hit page 1 of the trade journals that evening, his reputation bruised in print. I sat in my husband's seat across from the desk we once shared and whispered to no one, justice isn't loud. Sometimes, it's quiet clarity. I chose not to chase punitive damages, because dragging my daughter through a second front line didn't feel like victory. The gavel dropped. The papers sealed. In the silence I closed one chapter and cleared space for the next. The next day I walked through the door of what had been his study. The spare bedroom he always eyed as his sanctuary had become mine instead, a home office I'd choose on my own terms. I threw away old photographs, the ones that showed a grin I no longer recognized. I replaced them with travel maps and framed affirmations, own your story, purpose outlasts pain. I picked up a watercolor set hidden in the closet and painted a sky over the house. A neighbor knocked and left muffins, a simple smile and the words, "You've turned that storm into a compass." I journaled a letter to the younger me, the one who tolerated the unthinkable because hope felt safer than truth. I wrote, "Thank you for surviving what you didn't understand yet." Then I said yes to a TEDx invitation. The topic, rebuilding after emotional erosion. I felt lighter. Not healed. Just complete. Then the email came. Unexpected. From the CEO of the firm where I once hid behind a podium. The subject line, board seat offer. I stared at the screen in my new office, white walls and plants and the hum of reclamation. My first reaction, I left that chapter behind. But the second reaction was sharper. I realized growth isn't hiding from the past, it's mastering it. I replied yes, on one condition, there must be mentorship for single working mothers built into the role. I showed up at the meeting in a soft blue suit, calm, collected, commanding. One executive told me, "You don't just light a room up, Kristin. You rewire the grid." I left the building where I'd been overshadowed, now walking out with dignity. Sunset behind me. The elevator doors closed. I smiled. Power reshaped by purpose. That evening I found my daughter in the kitchen, laughter spilling as she tried to salvage burnt cookies. She asked, "Mom, what was she like, that woman in the old pictures of you and Dad?" I looked at the photo, my grin, his arm around me, everything polished. I told her, "That's someone I used to love before I learned to love myself more." She smiled and said, "You don't have to be strong for me. Just be real." I hugged her tight and whispered, "That's the strongest thing I know how to be." Later, I slipped my wedding ring into a memory box labeled lessons, not losses. I closed the lid. Morning came, gentle as after a storm. I stepped onto my porch, inhaled the air, and checked my phone. A message from an unknown number: "He's not done yet." I didn't flinch. I didn't fear. I replied, "So what's next?" The screen blinked. I looked up at the sky. Silence stretched around me. And then I said, "I thought the storm had passed, but sometimes, silence is just the eye."